Did you know that the weed you just pulled from your garden might have been worth its weight in silver to a medieval dyer? Or that the flower growing in the cracks of the pavement was once a critical part of a surgeon's toolkit? We live surrounded by plants we barely notice. We call them weeds, pests, or just background greenery. But for people living 1,000 years ago, this same greenery was their pharmacy, their hardware store, their textile mill, and their grocery. They didn't have plastic, synthetic dyes, or mass-produced medicine. They had what grew out of the ground. And they knew how to use it in ways that would shock us today. What if the key to understanding a huge part of their daily lives isn't in dusty books about kings and battles, but in the dandelion growing by your fence? What secrets did they know about the common nettle that we have completely forgotten? Let's peel back the centuries and look at the world through their eyes. A world where every plant had a purpose, and knowledge of that purpose could mean the difference between life and death, poverty and wealth, sickness and health. Number 20, could a root really create a king's fortune? The plant is called madder. Its scientific name is Rubia tinctorum. To us, it's an unremarkable perennial with small pale yellow flowers and wiry stems. You could walk past a patch of it and think nothing. But to a person in the Middle Ages, this plant was red gold. Its secret wasn't in its leaves or flowers. It was in its long tangled roots. Those roots, when harvested, dried, and processed, produced one of the most vibrant, color-fast red dyes in the world. Red was not just a color in medieval Europe. It was a statement. It was the color of power, of the church, of royalty, of wealth. The blood of Christ was red. The robes of cardinals were red. The cloaks of kings were red. To wear red was to show you had status. But creating a lasting, brilliant red was incredibly difficult. Most vegetable dyes produced weak brownish or pinkish colors that faded quickly in the sun and wash. When madder was different, it produced a true, deep, lasting red. The knowledge of madder is ancient, stretching back to Egypt and Rome, but it was during the medieval period that its cultivation became a massive state-sponsored industry. So important was this dye that in roughly 800 AD, the Emperor Charlemagne included madder in his Capitulaire de Velice, a decree that listed the specific plants that had to be grown on his imperial estates. This was not a suggestion, it was an order. He understood that controlling the supply of madder meant controlling a key economic resource. Entire regions, particularly in France and the Netherlands, built their economies around the cultivation of this single plant. The process was laborious. The roots had to grow for at least 3 years to produce the best dye. Then they were dug up, dried in special kilns, and ground into a powder. But the real magic, and the part that shows incredible medieval ingenuity, was in the dyeing process itself. You couldn't just boil cloth with madder powder and hope for the best. It wouldn't work. The dye molecule, alizarin, needs a helper to stick to the fabric. This helper is called a mordant. Medieval dyers discovered, through generations of trial and error, that treating the wool or linen with alum, a metallic salt often mined or imported at great expense, would make the madder dye bind permanently to the fibers. They could even change the shade of red from, fiery orange to deep crimson, by altering the water's acidity or adding other substances like iron. This was complex chemistry performed without beakers or labs by artisans whose knowledge was a closely guarded secret passed from master to apprentice. The famous Bayeux tapestry, stitched in the 11th century, still shows its madder-dyed reds today, a testament to the skill of those forgotten craftsmen. The use of madder as the world's primary red dye lasted for centuries, only collapsing in 1869 when German chemists synthesized alizarin in a lab, making the farmed root obsolete almost overnight. How did ancient people first discover that a specific metallic salt, alum, was the key to unlocking the color in a specific root? What other complex chemical processes reliant on specific minerals or bacteria did they understand for other plants, with that knowledge now completely lost? And could the genetic diversity of wild madder, which we now ignore, hold potential for other colors or compounds we haven't even thought to look for? Number 19. Did a common weed paint the faces of warriors? This plant is woad, or Isatis tinctoria. It's a member of the mustard family, with bright yellow flowers and long leaves. Today, it's often considered an invasive weed, but in medieval Europe, woad was the source of one thing blue. the only reliable native source of blue dye, and like matter for red, the demand for blue was enormous. And blue was the color of the heavens, the color of the Virgin Mary's robes in countless paintings, and eventually the color of French royalty. A good blue was a sign of quality and expense. The story of woad is often linked to the ancient Celts and Picts, with Roman accounts, like those of Julius Caesar, describing warriors who painted themselves blue to appear more terrifying in battle. While historians now debate the specifics of this, the association of woad with a fierce, ancient European identity is powerful. By the medieval period, that war paint had been transformed into a cornerstone of the textile economy. The process of getting blue dye from a green leaf was even more complex and frankly more disgusting than the process for madder. The leaves were harvested, crushed into a pulp, and then kneaded by hand into balls. These balls were left to dry and harden for weeks. Then came the truly unpleasant part. The dried woad balls were broken up, spread on a floor, sprinkled with water, and left to ferment. This was a process called couching. The fermentation, driven by bacteria, was hot and produced a powerful, suffocating stench of ammonia. Men known as woadmongers would work in these fermenting piles, often barefoot, turning the woad to keep the process going. The smell was so notoriously awful that Queen Elizabeth I, centuries later, decreed that woad could not be processed within 5 miles of any of her royal residences. After this second fermentation, the woad was packed into barrels, a stable product that could be sold and shipped across the continent. Cities like Toulouse in France and Erfurt in Germany became fantastically wealthy on the woad trade. To use it, the dyer had to induce a second specific kind of fermentation in a vat. They would mix the woad with a source of alkali, historically stale urine, or burnt wood, ash, potash, and other agents. This created a low oxygen chemical reaction that transformed the indican in the plant into the soluble, colorless indigo white. The wool or cloth was dipped into this foul-smelling, yellowish green liquid. It came out looking unremarkable, but then, as it was exposed to the oxygen in the air, the magic happened. The cloth would slowly, miraculously turn from yellow-green to a deep, beautiful blue. This was the only way to get blue into fabric. The industry was so vital that when ships began bringing a more potent blue dye, indigo, from India in the 16th and 17th centuries, woad-growing nations passed laws trying to ban the foreign competitor, even spreading propaganda that indigo was a corrosive and devilish dye. In the end, economics won, indigo was stronger, and eventually synthetic dyes killed the industry for good. What precise strains of bacteria were present in their fermentation piles, and did they contribute to the quality of the dye in a way we can no longer replicate? Did the constant exposure to high levels of ammonia and other chemicals during processing have long-term health effects on the woodworkers that were never recorded? And given the psychoactive properties of some related plants, is it possible the fumes from woad processing, or its use on skin, had effects beyond just color that ancient cultures understood and we have dismissed? Number 18 was your lawn once a pharmacy. Think of the common broadleaf plantain, Plantago major. It's that flat, low-growing plant with broad leaves and parallel veins that you find in every lawn, park, and crack in the sidewalk. It's so common, so resilient, we consider it a nuisance, but its medieval name gives a clue to its former status waybread in Old English. It was the bread, the sustenance that grew along the way, along every path and road, not just for eating, but for healing. Its primary medieval use was as one of the most powerful and accessible wound-healing herbs available. Everyone from soldiers on the battlefield to a child who scraped their knee in the village knew about plantain. The application was simple and direct. You would take a fresh leaf, chew it up into a little green pulp, and apply this poultice directly to a cut, scrape, insect bite, or sting. It was known to stop bleeding, soothe pain and itching, and perhaps most importantly, prevent infection. It was the original bandage and antiseptic, available for free everywhere you walked. This wasn't just folk wisdom, it was codified in the most important medical texts of the time. The Leech Book of Bald, a 10th century Anglo-Saxon medical manuscript, one of the oldest known medical texts from that period in England, is filled with remedies using waybread. It was the key ingredient in salves against all wounds. Its reputation was so great that it was included in the famous Nine Herbs Charm, an Old English poem designed to be chanted during the preparation of a healing salve. Plantain was listed alongside other potent herbs like mugwort and nettle, invoked to fight against poison and infection. Shakespeare, writing centuries later but drawing on this deep well of plant lore, references it in Romeo and Juliet when Romeo says, "Your plantain leaf is excellent for that," referring to a broken shin. By his time, it was already a common saying, a piece of knowledge everyone understood. Modern science is now catching up to what medieval people knew through observation. We now know that plantain leaves contain several active compounds. Aucubin, one of its main components, is a powerful antitoxin and has been shown in studies to have antimicrobial properties. Another compound, allantoin, promotes tissue regeneration and new skin cell growth. The leaves also contain salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, which would help with the pain, and mucilage, which creates a soothing, protective film over the wound. They literally had a perfectly designed, natural treatment for minor injuries growing at their feet. We've replaced it with plastic bandages and tubes of chemical creams. We traded a free, ubiquitous, and effective remedy for a manufactured one. How did they so accurately determine that chewing the leaf was the most effective way to apply it, a method that releases its active compounds? Were certain regional varieties of plantain, now lost to agricultural standardization, more potent than others? And what other common weeds possess similar wound healing properties that were once common knowledge but have now been completely forgotten, leaving us to rediscover them in a lab? Number 17, could you wear a stinging nettle? The stinging nettle, Urtica dioica, is a plant we actively avoid. We teach our children to recognize its jagged leaves and stay away from the tiny, stinging hairs that deliver a painful cocktail of formic acid and histamine. Our relationship with it is one of avoidance and annoyance. For a medieval person, this relationship was far more complex. Yes, they knew it stung, but they also knew it was a source of food, a powerful medicine, and most surprisingly, a source of high-quality fiber for making cloth. Long before cotton was widely available in Europe, and in places where flax for making linen was difficult to grow, nettle was a primary source for textiles. The process was remarkably similar to that of producing linen from flax. In the late summer, the tall, mature nettle stalks were harvested. They were then retted, a process of soaking them in water for several days or weeks. This allowed bacteria to break down the woody parts of the stalk, loosening the long, strong bast fibers within. After retting, the stalks were scutched, beaten with a wooden tool to break away the outer bark, and then heckled, pulled through metal combs to separate and clean the fine, silky fibers. These long, silvery white fibers were then spun into thread using a drop spindle or later a spinning wheel. The resulting thread was surprisingly fine, yet stronger and more lustrous than linen. It was woven into cloth that was used for everything from sails and sacks to fine household linens and even clothing. The 13th century Italian poet, Albert of Brescia, wrote of how the best nettle cloth could rival linen in its quality. Archaeological finds have confirmed this widespread use. Fragments of nettle textiles have been discovered at medieval sites across Europe, from Scandinavia to the Alps. In a 2012 study of fabrics from burial sites in Woad, Denmark dating to the Viking Age, researchers found that while linen was present, so was a significant amount of high-quality nettle cloth, indicating it was a valued material. The famous fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, The Wild Swans, where the princess must weave coats of stinging nettles to save her brothers, is a distant folk memory of a time when making cloth from nettles was a known, albeit difficult, reality. So why did we forget how to do this? The process was incredibly labor-intensive, and as trade routes expanded, flax became easier to grow in more places, and eventually cotton became the dominant, cheaper fiber. The knowledge of how to process nettle, a skill once passed down through generations, simply faded away. And we chose convenience over a resilient local resource. Today, a few artisan producers are trying to revive the craft of making nettle cloth, but it remains a niche curiosity, not the vital industry it once was. Exactly what bacterial and fungal species were essential for the retting process, and did different water sources, ponds, rivers, dew create different qualities of fiber? Were there specific harvesting times or techniques for getting the longest and strongest fibers that are no longer remembered? And could modern genetic modification of nettles remove their sting while enhancing their fiber properties, potentially creating a new, sustainable textile for our own time? Number 16. Did a flower once tell you the time? The dandelion, Taraxacum officinale, is the definition of a lawn weed. We spend millions on herbicides to eradicate this cheerful yellow flower. To the medieval mind, this would have been insanity. The dandelion was a valued plant, a source of food, medicine, and even a way to tell time. Its name reveals its importance. Dandelion is a corruption of the French dandelion, meaning leon's tooth, a reference to its jagged leaves. Its most important forgotten use was as a reliable and potent medicinal herb, specifically for the liver and kidneys. In a time before modern diagnostics, medieval physicians and herbalists paid close attention to the body's fluids. The color and quantity of urine was a primary diagnostic tool. A plant that could clearly and safely increase the flow of urine was seen as a powerful tool for purging the body of bad humors, the theoretical cause of most diseases according to the system of medicine inherited from the Greeks. Dandelion was the best at this. Its French folk name is pissenlit, which literally translates to piss in bed. It was a well-known powerful diuretic. This wasn't just folklore, it was prescribed medicine. The great 11th century Persian physician Avicenna, whose work, The Canon of Medicine, was a standard medical textbook in Europe for centuries, wrote extensively about the properties of taraxacum, recommending it for liver and spleen obstructions. Hildegard of Bingen, the influential 12th century German abbess and herbalist, also described its use as a tonic and cleanser. The entire plant was used, the roots were dried and used to make a decoction for liver ailments, the leaves were eaten as a spring green to cleanse the blood after a long winter of preserved foods, and the flowers were used to make wine. The dandelion was also a clock. It was one of the dial of flowers proposed by the Swedish botanist Carolus Linnaeus in the 18th century, but the knowledge is much older. The flower head reliably opens in the morning around 5 or 6 a.m. and closes in the late afternoon. For a farmer or a traveler without a mechanical clock, a field of dandelions was a perfectly good way to estimate the time of day. Its seed head, the familiar dandelion clock, was used by children for games of fortune-telling, another layer of its integration into daily life. We have forgotten its value because we have other more powerful diuretics. We buy our greens in plastic bags from the supermarket, and we all have clocks on our phones. We have made this incredibly useful plant obsolete. How did they determine the correct dosage for its diuretic effect without causing dehydration or electrolyte imbalance? Was there a difference in potency between dandelions harvested in the spring versus the fall? Something a medieval herbalist would have known, but which we do not study. And what other subtle environmental cues, like the opening and closing of flowers, did people once use to navigate their day, a form of natural literacy we have now almost entirely lost? Number 15, could you build a fire with a leaf? This plant is the great mullein, Verbascum thapsus. It's a tall, dramatic plant, sending up a single, thick stalk that can be several feet high, covered in large, fuzzy, silver-green leaves. It often grows in disturbed soil along roadsides or in forgotten fields. We mostly ignore it. But for centuries, this plant was a source of light in the darkness. Its most fascinating forgotten use was as a natural candle or torch. The stalk, once it has dried out in the fall, is sturdy and lightweight. The thick, fuzzy leaves are naturally absorbent and flammable. The Romans called mullein candelaria, from which we get candle. The process was simple. The dried stalk would be dipped in a fat, like tallow, animal fat, or beeswax. Once saturated, it could be lit. It would burn slowly and steadily, not with a bright flame, but with a persistent, smoky glow. It was a perfect low-cost torch for traveling at night or for use in a drafty home. These were often called hags' tapers, a name that hints at their association with folk magic and wise women who knew the secrets of the wild plants. Even without the fat, the downy fluff scraped from the leaves was a superior tinder for starting fires. It could catch a spark from flint and steel when other materials were too damp. And beyond fire, those same soft leaves had another, more intimate use. They were known as quakers rouge, as a brisk rubbing on the cheeks would cause a temporary, harmless reddening of the skin. More practically, their incredible softness made them a ready-made substitute for cloth, used as bandages or, as some historical sources delicately put it, as nature's toilet paper. Its medicinal uses were also well known. A tea or infusion of the flowers was a premier remedy for coughs and respiratory ailments, a use that continues in herbalism today. An oil made by infusing the flowers in olive oil was a classic remedy for earaches, a practice described by the Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder and carried all the way through the medieval period. The 17th century herbalist Nicholas Culpeper, in his Art Seed, the English physician, summarizes centuries of knowledge when he writes that mullein is excellent for an old cough and that there is no better remedy in the world for it. We forgot its use as a torch when we got cheap wax candles, and later, oil lamps and electricity. We forgot its use as tinder when we invented matches. We forgot its other uses when we got manufactured goods to take their place. Did the type of fat used to make a, mullein torch, beef tallow, sheep tallow, beeswax affect the quality of the light or the amount of smoke it produced? Are there specific microscopic structures on the leaf hairs that make it so effective at catching a spark? And could this be replicated in modern materials? And how many other plants, now just seen as weeds, were once integral parts of a fire-making toolkit that has been completely lost to time? Number 14, was there a plant that could mend a broken bone? The plant is comfrey, Symphytum officinale. It's a fast-growing plant with large, hairy leaves and clusters of bell-shaped, purple, or cream-colored flowers. For gardeners today, sometimes use it as a fertilizer because its deep roots pull nutrients from the soil. But its medieval reputation was much more dramatic. Its common names tell the story nipbone, boneset, and bruisewort. Its primary use was as an external treatment for mending broken bones, healing wounds, and reducing swelling. The belief in comfrey's power was incredibly strong. The application involved creating a poultice from the root or leaves. The fresh root would be grated, or the leaves mashed into a thick, sticky, green-black paste. This paste would be spread thickly over the area of a fracture or a bad sprain. It was then wrapped tightly with cloth. As the comfrey poultice dried, it would harden into a rigid cast, not unlike a modern plaster cast. People believed that the plant itself was actively working to knit the bone back together under the cast. The 16th century herbalist John Gerard wrote, "The roots are of great force in wounds, and are especially good for ruptures and broken bones." This belief was so ingrained that people used it for everything from a soldier's battle injury to a farmer's fall from a ladder. This is a classic example of the doctrine of signatures, a philosophy popular in medieval and Renaissance times, which held that God had marked plants to indicate their use. The thick, mucilaginous root of comfrey, when boiled, produced a gluey substance, which was thought to signify its ability to glue bones and tissues back together. While the philosophy itself is not scientific, the observation in this case was surprisingly accurate. Modern science has shown that comfrey contains high levels of a compound called allantoin. Allantoin is a cell proliferant, meaning it speeds up the natural replacement of body cells. This is why it's used today in some pharmaceutical creams for skin conditions. It really does promote the growth of new tissue. It also contains rosmarinic acid, which has anti-inflammatory properties, helping to reduce the swelling and pain associated with a fracture. The drying poultice would have immobilized the limb, which is the most important part of setting a bone, while the chemicals in the plant helped reduce inflammation and speed up the healing of the surrounding tissues. While it couldn't magically mend a badly displaced fracture for hairline fractures, sprains, and deep bruises, it was likely a remarkably effective treatment. Its use fell out of favor with the rise of modern orthopedics and plaster of Paris. It is now rarely used externally and never taken internally due to concerns about liver toxicity from other compounds in the plant, a danger medieval people may not have fully understood. How did they learn to distinguish between the amount needed for healing and a potentially toxic dose? Did they have specific preparation methods like boiling or aging the root that reduced its toxicity for external use? And could the specific combination of compounds in comfrey, particularly allantoin and rosmarinic acid, be more effective together than they are when isolated in a modern lab, suggesting a synergistic effect we are missing? At number 13, could you scrub your pots with a weed? Imagine your kitchen without a scouring pad or steel wool. How would you clean a burnt, crusted pot after cooking over an open fire? For medieval people, the answer grew in damp, marshy places. The plant is horsetail, Equisetum arvens. It's a strange, ancient plant, a living fossil that doesn't have flowers or broad leaves, but rather jointed, hollow stems that look a bit like a tiny, primitive bamboo. It's a relic of the Carboniferous period, a time before dinosaurs. Today, we mostly see it as a persistent garden weed, almost impossible to get rid of. Its most common medieval use had nothing to do with medicine or food. It was a tool. It was the original scouring pad. The stems of horsetail are impregnated with a huge amount of silica, the same abrasive mineral that makes up sand and is used to make glass. If you run your fingers along a stem of horsetail, it feels rough and gritty. This natural abrasiveness made it the perfect tool for scrubbing metal, wood, and pewter. A bundle of dried horsetail stems was a standard item in any medieval kitchen. It was used to scour pots and pans, to polish armor, to clean pewter plates until they shone, and even by woodworkers and Fletcher's arrow makers for fine sanding and polishing of wood. It was so effective that it was often called scouring rush or pewterwort. The 16th century English botanist William Turner noted in his herbal that it was used by furbishers and pewterers and was marvelous good to scour with. This was a piece of technology harvested directly from nature. It was free, effective, and biodegradable. While its primary use was mechanical, it did have medicinal applications as well. Because of its high mineral content, herbalists used it as a diuretic and, more importantly, as a styptic to stop bleeding, both internally and externally. Its abrasive nature meant a poultice of horsetail could help clean a wound, while the plant's chemical properties helped the blood to clot. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder claimed it could stop a nosebleed just by being held in the hand. This knowledge carried through the medieval period, with horsetail being a common battlefield remedy for staunching wounds. We forgot its use as a scrubber when mass-produced abrasives like steel wool and sandpaper were invented. They were more convenient and standardized, and the humble horsetail was relegated to weed status. How did people first discover that this specific plant was so high in silica, a property not visible to the naked eye? Were certain species of equisetum better for coarse scouring, while others were better for fine polishing, a level of detail now lost? And what other plants have unique physical or structural properties beyond their chemical ones that would have made them useful as tools in ways we can no longer even imagine? Number 12. Did a soldier's life depend on a roadside flower? The plant is yarrow, Achillea millefolium. It's a common wildflower with feathery, fern-like leaves and flat-top clusters of small white or pinkish flowers. You can find it in meadows, lawns, and along roadsides all over the northern hemisphere. It's so common we don't even see it. But for a soldier in a medieval army, this plant could be the difference between bleeding to death on the battlefield and surviving to fight another day. Yarrow's most important and ancient use was as a styptic, a substance that stops bleeding. Its botanical name, Achillea, points directly to this. It is named for the mythical Greek hero Achilles, who was said to have been taught its use by the centaur Chiron, and who used it to treat the wounds of his soldiers during the Trojan War. Whether the myth is true or not, it shows that the plant's reputation as a wound healer is thousands of years old. This knowledge was vital in the brutal, close quarters combat of the medieval period. Swords, axes, and arrows created horrific wounds, and uncontrolled bleeding was a primary cause of death. Soldiers would carry dried, powdered yarrow with them into battle. When wounded, they or their comrades would stuff the powder or a poultice of fresh, chewed leaves directly into the wound. It was known to be remarkably effective at staunching the flow of blood, allowing for the wound to be bound. Its other common names reflect this use: herba militaris, the military herb, soldier's woundwort, and knight's milfoil. Finding yarrow growing on a battlefield was considered a sign of God's providence, a remedy placed right where it was needed most. Skeletons found in a 7th century graveyard at a site called Crowland Abbey in England have shown evidence of sword wounds that had healed. While it is impossible to be certain, the use of powerful styptic herbs like yarrow would have been critical for this kind of survival. But modern science has validated this ancient practice. Yarrow contains several compounds, including the alkaloid oculane, which has been shown to facilitate blood clotting. It also has anti-inflammatory and antiseptic properties thanks to compounds like azulene, which would have helped to prevent the infections that were often more deadly than the wound itself. It was a natural, all-in-one first aid treatment. The use of yarrow faded with the development of modern battlefield medicine, tourniquets, and antiseptic surgery. A simple plant, however effective, couldn't compete with the systematic medical care that developed from the 19th century onwards. How did ancient soldiers know to chew the leaves to create a poultice, a method that would have mixed the plant's compounds with the clotting factors in their own saliva? Was the yarrow that grew in certain regions with different soil compositions considered more potent than others? And what other battlefield remedies existed, perhaps less famous than yarrow, whose knowledge died out completely with the last generation of soldiers who used them? Number 11. Could a burdock burr change the world? Burdock, or Arctium lapa, is a large, coarse biennial plant with huge, heart-shaped leaves and prickly purple flower heads that after blooming turn into the familiar burrs that stick to your clothes and your dog's fur. We see it as like a nuisance, a tall, scraggly weed. A medieval person, saw it as a powerful medicine, a food source, and unknowingly a model for future technology. Its most significant medieval use was as a blood purifier and a remedy for skin diseases. In the system of humoral medicine, diseases like eczema, psoriasis, boils, and acne were often attributed to an excess of bad humors in the blood. The goal of the physician was to cleanse the blood. Burdock root was considered one of the best plants for this job. The decoction of the dried root was taken as a bitter tonic, believed to stimulate the liver and kidneys to filter impurities from the body. The 12th century Welsh medical text, the Physicians of Meadfie, contains numerous recipes using burdock for cleansing the blood and treating skin conditions. It was a long-term treatment, not a quick fix, but its reputation for clearing up persistent skin problems was legendary. The roots, when harvested in the first year before the flower stalk grew, were also a valuable food source. Peeled and boiled, they were eaten as a vegetable similar to parsnips. This practice is still common in Japan, where it is called gobo. For medieval peasants, this was another free, nutritious food that could be foraged from the wild. The forgotten potential, however, lay in the burrs themselves. While medieval people were undoubtedly annoyed by them, they didn't have the tools to see what made them stick so well. That discovery came in 1941, when the Swiss engineer Georges de Mestral came home from a walk and noticed burdock burrs stuck to his dog's fur and his own pants. He looked at them under a microscope and saw that the burrs were covered in hundreds of tiny hooks that would catch on the loops in fabric or fur. This observation of a simple natural mechanism led him to invent Velcro, a portmanteau of the French words velour, velvet, and crochet hook. While the invention is modern, the principle was there, clinging to the wool tunics of shepherds and the habits of monks for over 1,000 years, completely unappreciated. It's a perfect example of a forgotten use that was waiting for the right perspective to be seen. How many other natural mechanisms, perfected by millions of years of evolution, did medieval people interact with daily but never have the means to understand or replicate? Did they have non-medicinal uses for the stickiness of burrs, perhaps in trapping small animals or in children's games that have left no historical record? And could the specific combination of compounds in burdock root that made it effective for skin conditions be a clue to new dermatological treatments we have yet to develop? Number 10 was this plant a charm against evil. The plant is vervain, also known as Verbena officinalis. It's a slender, unassuming plant with small, pale lilac flowers on thin spikes. It doesn't have the dramatic appearance of mullein or the immediate utility of nettle. It could easily be overlooked. But in the medieval imagination, vervain held a place of incredible power. It was considered one of the most potent magical and sacred herbs. Its primary forgotten use was not medicinal in the physical sense, but in the spiritual sense. It was a protective amulet. It was believed to ward off evil spirits, witches, and the plague. It was used in rituals of cleansing and consecration. A house with vervain hung over the door was considered protected from lightning and demonic forces. This belief was not a fringe superstition. It was deeply embedded in the culture, a remnant of pre-Christian practices that had been absorbed and adapted by the church. The Romans had used it to purify their altars, and the Druids were said to have held it in a place of special reverence. This sacred status carried into the Christian era. Legend held that vervain was found on the Mount of Calvary and was used to staunch the wounds of Christ on the cross, giving it the name herb of the cross. Because of this association, it was considered a holy herb, powerful against all forms of evil. The medical texts from the period, like the 10th century Leech Book of Bald, place it in remedies that are part medicine and part magical charm. A prescription might call for the patient to drink a vervain infusion while reciting a specific psalm or prayer. To the medieval mind, healing the body and protecting the soul were not separate activities. They were deeply intertwined, and vervain was a plant that worked on both levels. While it was also used for physical ailments as a diuretic, for nerve pain, and to treat fevers, its primary power was always seen as spiritual. When a physician like the 14th century John of Gaddesden recommended vervain for a headache, it was unclear if he believed the effect was purely chemical or if the plant was driving out a headache demon. This magical association was ultimately its undoing. As the scientific revolution took hold and the old beliefs were dismissed as superstition, vervain lost its exalted status. Without its magical reputation, it was just another minor herb, and its use faded into obscurity. What was the original pre-Christian ritual or belief that gave vervain such a powerful reputation in the first place? Is it possible the plant contains subtle psychoactive compounds that, when used in a ritual context, could induce a feeling of peace or spiritual well-being, which was interpreted as protection? And how many other plants were valued primarily for their spiritual or magical properties, a dimension of herbalism that modern science has no framework to even investigate? Number 9. Did travelers put a weed in their shoes? The plant is mugwort, Artemisia vulgaris. It's a tall, weedy-looking plant with silvery green, deeply divided leaves and inconspicuous flowers. It grows abundantly along roadsides, in waste places, and on riverbanks. Its smell is pungent and sage-like. Today, it's mostly known to brewers of specialty beers or practitioners of traditional Chinese medicine. But in medieval Europe, it was the essential companion for any traveler. Its most practical forgotten use was to combat fatigue. It was the traveler's herb. People on a long journey on foot, which was almost every journey for most people, would place fresh leaves of mugwort inside their shoes in the morning. It was universally believed that this would prevent their feet from getting tired or sore. The Roman naturalist Pliny claimed that a traveler with mugwort on his person will not be sensible of the wearisomeness of his journey. This wasn't a medical prescription, it was just something everyone knew. Soldiers, pilgrims, merchants, and messengers all relied on this simple trick. And the Anglo-Saxon name for the plant was wegbred, which means way broad, indicating its presence along all paths ready for use. Beyond this, mugwort was deeply connected with dreams and protection. It was considered a wonnerogen, a substance that induces or enhances dreams. People would stuff pillows with mugwort to promote vivid or prophetic dreams. This association with the subconscious world also linked it to protection from evil during the vulnerable state of sleep. A sprig of mugwort hung over a bed was thought to keep nightmares or demonic visitors at bay. It also had a crucial role in brewing before the widespread adoption of hops. From the early Middle Ages until about the 15th century, the primary bittering and preserving agent used in beer was not hops, but a mixture of herbs called grüt. Mugwort was often the primary ingredient in grüt, along with other herbs like yarrow and sweet gale. It imparted a strange sage-like bitterness, and was believed to have a more psychoactive effect than modern hopped beer. And the control of grüt was a major source of income for local lords and the church, who held monopolies on its production. The shift to hops was not just a change in taste, but a major economic and political event that helped break these local monopolies. We forgot about mugwort in our shoes when we started traveling in cars and trains, or we forgot about it in our beer when hops proved to be a better preservative and more suited to large-scale production. Is there a chemical compound in mugwort that can be absorbed through the skin of the feet that has an anti-inflammatory or mild analgesic effect? Did the strong smell simply have a psychological, invigorating effect on a weary traveler? And what did the group beers of the Middle Ages with their mugwort base actually feel like to drink, and did their effects shape medieval society in ways we now fail to recognize? Number 8 was this flower, a cure for a troubled mind. The plant is St. John's wort, Hypericum perfratum. It's a shrubby perennial with cheerful 5-petaled yellow flowers that, when crushed, release a reddish oil. If you hold a leaf up to the light, you can see tiny translucent dots which give it the name perfratum. We know this plant today as a popular herbal supplement for mild depression. This use is not a modern invention, it is a direct continuation of a belief that is over 1,000 years old. In the medieval period, St. John's wort was not seen as a treatment for depression, a concept that didn't exist in the same way. Instead, it was a herb used to treat melancholy, a condition attributed to an excess of black bile, one of the 4 humors. Melancholy was a state of deep sadness, lethargy, and despair, but it was also seen as something more sinister. This state of mind was believed to make a person vulnerable to demons and evil spirits. St. John's wort was the primary remedy because it was thought to literally drive out the darkness. Its common name links it to St. John the Baptist, as it blooms around the summer solstice, near St. John's Day, June 24th. The reddish oil that bleeds from the flowers was seen as a symbol of the saint's blood. Its primary use was as a spiritual and physical protector against the forces of darkness. It was gathered on St. John's Eve, a time of powerful pagan and Christian ritual, and hung in houses and barns to ward off evil spirits, witches, and the evil eye for the coming year. It was burned in solstice bonfires to purify the air and protect the community. For an individual suffering from melancholy, it was taken as a tea or tincture. The great 16th century physician Paracelsus wrote that its virtue is to drive forth specters and illusions from the brain. He saw no distinction between a chemical imbalance and a spiritual affliction. The plant healed both. Modern science has focused on compounds like hypericin and hyperforin in the plant, which are believed to affect neurotransmitters like serotonin in the brain, similar to modern antidepressant drugs. Clinical trials have shown it can be effective for mild to moderate depression. What we have forgotten is the context. For medieval people, the plant was not just a collection of chemicals. Its power came from its color, the time it was harvested, its sacred associations, and its ability to let in the light, both literally and spiritually. Its effectiveness was inseparable from the belief system in which it was used. How much of its historical effectiveness was due to a placebo effect, powered by the immense spiritual significance attributed to the plant? Did the specific ritual of harvesting it on the solstice, a time of maximum daylight, psychologically prime people to believe in its light-bringing properties? And in our modern sterile extraction of its active compounds, are we losing other more subtle components of the plant that may have contributed to its healing power in ways we don't yet understand? Number 7 was an entire medicine cabinet hidden in one tree. The tree is the elder, Sambucus nigra. It's a common, fast-growing, small tree or large shrub found in hedgerows and woodlands. It has distinctive creamy white flat-topped flower clusters in early summer, which turn into drooping bunches of dark purple-black berries in the fall. We might know it today as the source of elderflower cordial or elderberry syrup for colds. But for a medieval person, the elder tree was not just a source of one or two remedies, it was a complete pharmacy. Nearly every part of the elder tree was used for something. It was so versatile that it was often called the medicine chest of the country people. The flowers were the most common remedy. They were made into a tea that was a primary treatment for fevers, colds, and flu. It was a powerful diaphoretic, meaning it induces sweating, which was believed to help break a fever. An ointment made from the flowers was used for sunburns and skin irritations. The berries, rich in vitamins, were made into a syrup or wine called a rab that was taken all winter to ward off coughs and respiratory illnesses. A 2004 study by Israeli virologist Dr. Madeline Munkuoglu found that a standardized elderberry extract could inhibit the replication of flu viruses, suggesting this ancient use has a real scientific basis. But the uses went further. The leaves, which have a narcotic smell, were used to make a green ointment for treating bruises, sprains, and chilblains. They were also used as an insect repellent, hung in doorways, or rubbed on the skin. The bark, especially the inner bark, was a powerful purgative and diuretic, used for constipation and edema, though it had to be used with great care as it could be toxic. Even the pith of the young branches had a use, pushed out to create hollow tubes for everything from children's pop guns to spigots for barrels. This utility was intertwined with a deep and powerful folklore. The elder was believed to be protected by a spirit, the elder mother or Hildmore. To cut down an elder tree without asking her permission was to invite terrible luck. This superstition may have served a practical purpose, preventing the overharvesting of such a vital resource. Because of its connection to life and death, it was often planted near homes for protection, but also in graveyards. This complete integration of practical use and spiritual belief meant the elder was not just a plant, it was a presence, a powerful ally in the daily struggle for health and survival. What other parts of the tree, like the roots or the pollen, had uses that have been so completely forgotten that they don't even survive in folklore? Did the specific time of harvesting a flower picked in the morning versus the evening, a berry picked before or after the first frost, change its medicinal properties in ways a medieval herbalist would know instinctively? And how did the powerful belief in the elder mother spirit influence the way people used the plant, perhaps leading to more sustainable and respectful harvesting practices than we employ today? Number 6, could a hedge keep your heart healthy? The tree is the hawthorn, Crategus monogyna. It's one of the most common trees in the European landscape, a small, thorny tree that makes up the backbone of ancient hedgerows. It's famous for its profusion of white or pinkish blossoms in May, giving it the name May tree, and its bright red berries, called haws, in the autumn. For centuries, its primary use was physical and symbolic. It was a boundary marker. Its thorns made an impenetrable barrier for livestock, and its presence defined the edges of fields and kingdoms. But alongside this practical use was a more subtle medicinal one. Hawthorn was known as a heart remedy. This was not its most famous use in the medieval period, but the knowledge existed and was passed down through generations of herbalists. The flowers, leaves, and berries were all used to make tonics and wines that were believed to comfort the heart and calm the spirits. While humoral theory didn't have a clear concept of blood pressure or heart failure, physicians recognized conditions of a weak heart, shortness of breath, and what we might now call anxiety or panic attacks. Hawthorn was the gentle, long-term remedy for these conditions. Its reputation as a heart medicine grew stronger after the medieval period, but its roots are there. The Irish Brehon Laws, ancient legal texts first written down in the 7th century, list hawthorn as one of the nobles of the wood, indicating its importance. Its association with the heart may also have been symbolic. As a tree of boundaries and protection, it was seen as protecting the heart, the center of life and emotion. It was also deeply connected to May Day celebrations, a time of fertility and celebration of life, further linking it to the vitality of the heart. Modern pharmacology has extensively studied hawthorn and confirmed its ancient reputation. It contains a complex mixture of flavonoids and proanthocyanidins that have been shown in numerous clinical trials to have a powerful effect on the cardiovascular system. They can improve coronary artery blood flow, strengthen the contractions of the heart muscle, and act as a mild ACE inhibitor, helping to lower blood pressure. Today, standardized hawthorn extract is a prescription drug for heart conditions in countries like Germany and Switzerland. We have rediscovered its power in the lab, but we have forgotten its holistic context, its role not just as a medicine, but as a protector, a boundary, and a sacred center of spring rituals. How did medieval herbalists, without any way to measure blood pressure or listen to a heartbeat, first make the connection between this thorny tree and the health of the heart? Was its effectiveness for calming the spirits a result of its physiological effects on the cardiovascular system, or does it contain other, milder sedative compounds? And could the traditional use of the whole plant leaves, flowers, and berries together be more effective than the modern approach of isolating specific chemical compounds? Number 5. Did people use a flower to keep flies off their meat? The plant is tansy, Tenacetium vulgare. It's a perennial herb with distinctive button-like yellow flower heads and dark ferny leaves. It has a strong, pungent, camphor-like smell. You might find it growing on roadsides or in old cottage gardens. For us, it's an ornamental curiosity. For a medieval household, it was an essential tool for preservation and pest control. In a world without refrigeration, keeping food, especially meat, from spoiling and becoming infested with flies and maggots was a constant struggle. Tansy was one of the best solutions they had. Its most important use was as an insect repellent and a preservative. The strong scent that we find aromatic was repellent to most insects. Freshly cut tansy would be hung in bundles from the rafters of the kitchen or larder to keep flies away. Meat would be packed in dried, powdered tansy or wrapped in fresh leaves to deter flies from laying their eggs on it. This was so common that tansy was often called herba immortalitatis, the herb of immortality, not because it made people immortal, but because it preserved bodies both human and animal from decay and corruption. It was frequently used in winding sheets for burials for this very reason. Tansy also had a place on the dinner table, though a controversial one. In the spring, special tansy cakes or puddings were eaten, especially around Easter. These were made with the young leaves of the plant and were thought to help cleanse the body of the bad humors accumulated during a winter of eating salted and preserved foods. The flavor was intensely bitter and aromatic, a taste that is completely foreign to our modern palates. However, tansy had a much darker and more dangerous use. It contains a toxic compound called thujoni. In concentrated doses, tansy oil is a powerful convulsant and poison. This property was well known, and for centuries it was used as an abortifacient. Women would drink a tea made from tansy to induce a miscarriage. This was a desperate, dangerous, and often deadly practice. An overdose could easily kill the woman as well. This knowledge was part of a hidden world of women's herbal lore, rarely written down but passed on from mother to daughter. This dangerous aspect of the plant, combined with the availability of modern refrigeration and insecticides, caused its use to plummet. We no longer need it and we fear its toxicity. How did women determine a dose that might be effective as an abortifacient without being lethal? A terrifyingly fine line to walk. Do the insect repellent properties of tansy extend to pests in the garden? And was it used as a form of natural pesticide for crops? And are there other common plants whose historical uses include this kind of dangerous double-edged sword knowledge that has been deliberately suppressed or forgotten over time? Number 4, did they drink a weed before they drank coffee? The plant is chicory, Sicorium intybus. It's a common roadside plant with tough branched stems and beautiful, sky blue flowers that famously open in the morning and close by midday. Many people recognize it but don't know its name. We might know it today as an additive that is sometimes blended with coffee, especially in the New Orleans style. But for centuries before coffee was widely available in Europe, chicory root had its own distinct purpose. Its most important forgotten use was as a medicinal tonic, especially for the liver, and later as a coffee substitute. The use of chicory as a liver remedy is ancient, mentioned by the Roman physician Galen. This tradition continued through the medieval period. The root was dried, roasted, and ground, then boiled in water to create a bitter, dark beverage. This was drunk as a cleansing tonic, believed to purify the blood and treat liver obstructions, a common diagnosis in humoral medicine for a range of digestive ailments. Charlemagne, in his 8th century Capitulaire de Velice, listed chicory as one of the herbs to be cultivated on his estates, a sign of its established value. The transition to a coffee substitute happened much later, primarily in the 17th and 18th centuries when coffee was an expensive imported luxury. People discovered that the roasted chicory root produced a drink that was dark, bitter, and full-bodied, much like coffee, but without the caffeine and available for the cost of digging it up from the roadside. It became known as poor man's coffee. During times of hardship and blockade, like the Napoleonic Wars in the early 19th century, when access to real coffee was cut off, chicory consumption became widespread across Europe. It was a drink of necessity that became a drink of choice for many. The young leaves of the plant were also used as a bitter salad green, similar to its cultivated relatives, endive and radicchio. This was another spring tonic food, valued for its ability to awaken the digestive system after winter. We forgot its primary use as a liver medicine with the advent of modern pharmacology. And while its use as a coffee substitute persists, most people see it as an adulterant rather than a valuable beverage in its own right, with its own long and independent history. How did people first discover that roasting the root transformed its flavor into something palatable and coffee-like? Did the time of year the root was harvested affect its bitterness and medicinal properties, a detail a medieval herbalist would have known? And what other common roots could be roasted and prepared in a similar way to create beverages with unique flavors and effects? A whole world of herbal coffees we have never explored. Number 3, could a pillow of flowers help you sleep? The plant is hops, Humulus lupulus. We know this vine plant for one thing and one thing only: beer. The female flower cones, or hops, are the essential ingredient that gives modern beer its characteristic bitterness and aroma, and also acts as a preservative. But the widespread use of hops in beer is a relatively late medieval development, only becoming common in much of Europe after the 15th century. Before that, hops had another, much quieter use. Its most surprising forgotten use was as a sedative and sleep aid. The fresh or dried flower cones of the hop plant have a noticeable sedative effect. This was well known to hop pickers, who often reported feeling drowsy after a long day of harvesting. This property was harnessed in a very direct way. People would stuff a small pillow or sachet with dried hop flowers and place it near their head at night. The gentle aroma released by the hops was believed to calm the nerves and induce a deep, restful sleep. This was known as a hop pillow. This remedy was particularly recommended for restlessness, anxiety, and insomnia. As the famous 12th century abbess and herbalist Hildegard of Bingen wrote about hops, noting its ability to put a stop to the melancholy in a man, and that it was good for the soul. While she was one of the early proponents of its use in beer for its preservative qualities, she also recognized its effects on mood and spirit. The use of a hop pillow for sleeplessness was a common folk remedy that persisted for centuries. It's said that King George III of England used a hop pillow to help him sleep during his periods of illness and mental distress. Modern science has identified a number of compounds in hops that have sedative effects, including a volatile oil called methylbutanol. Research has shown that this compound can have a mild calming effect on the central nervous system. The hop pillow was a simple, non-invasive form of aromatherapy, delivering these compounds gently throughout the night. We have completely forgotten this use because we now have powerful synthetic sleeping pills. A gentle herbal pillow seems quaint and ineffective in comparison, and our singular focus on hops for beer has overshadowed all of its other historical applications. Did the effectiveness of a hop pillow depend on the specific variety of hop used, something modern brewers know a lot about, but which has never been studied for sedative properties. Could other aromatic flowers or herbs, once used in a similar way for sleep or mood, have real, measurable effects that we have dismissed as folklore? And in our quest for powerful single-molecule drugs, have we lost the value of gentle, low-dose, multi-compound remedies like the hop pillow? Number 2, did witches really use this plant to fly? This plant is henbane Hyoscyamus niger. It is a coarse, hairy, sticky plant with foul-smelling leaves and eerie, bell-shaped, yellow-purple flowers with a dark, veiny throat. It is a member of the nightshade family, and it is dangerously poisonous. This is not a plant to be handled lightly. Its modern use is virtually non-existent outside of specialized pharmacology. But in the medieval world, it was a plant of immense and terrifying power. Its most notorious forgotten use was as a powerful anesthetic and a key ingredient in so-called witches' flying ointments. Henbane is rich in the tropane alkaloids scopolamine and hyoscyamine. These substances are potent anticholinergic. In controlled doses, they can induce a state of twilight sleep, a semi-conscious state with powerful pain-killing and amnesiac properties. Medieval surgeons working without modern anesthetics used sponges soaked in a mixture of henbane, opium poppy, and mandrake called a soporific sponge. This sponge would be held over the patient's nose and mouth. The inhaled fumes would render them unconscious or semi-conscious enough to endure the horror of surgery. Theodoric of Lucca, a 13th century Italian surgeon, described this exact recipe in his work on surgery. It was a crude and dangerous form of anesthesia, where the line between sedation and a fatal overdose was razor thin, but it was better than nothing. The same psychoactive properties led to its darkest reputation. Henbane was consistently cited as a primary ingredient in the ointments and brews used by accused witches. These ointments were said to be rubbed on the skin or on a staff. The active alkaloids can be absorbed through the skin. A sufficient dose would induce powerful hallucinations, a feeling of dissociation from one's body, and the sensation of flying or soaring. Flying ointment likely did not make anyone physically fly. Instead, it sent them on a powerful, terrifying internal trip. The accounts of witches' sabbaths, of flying through the night and meeting with the devil, may well have been detailed descriptions of a henbane-induced hallucination. This is the theory proposed by ethnobotanists like Richard Evans Schultes. The extreme danger of the plant, combined with its association with witchcraft and dark magic, made it taboo. As more reliable anesthetics like ether and chloroform were discovered in the 19th century, the surgical use of henbane was abandoned. Its reputation was so toxic that all knowledge of its use, both medical and illicit, was driven deep underground, almost completely forgotten by the general public. How did medieval surgeons calculate a non-lethal dose for their soporific sponges, a calculation that would challenge a modern anesthesiologist? Was the flying sensation a consistent and predictable effect of the plant, or did it vary wildly from person to person? And what other powerful psychoactive plants were part of this hidden underground world of folk magic and medicine, their secrets now lost forever due to persecution and fear? Number 1, did women use a deadly poison as a beauty product? The plant is belladonna, Atropa belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade. It's a bushy plant with dull green leaves and solitary bell-shaped purplish-brown flowers. The most notable feature is its shiny, black berries, which look deceptively like sweet cherries. Every single part of this plant is intensely poisonous. It contains the same class of tropane alkaloids as henbane, but in even more potent concentrations, particularly atropine. A handful of berries can be fatal to an adult, and yet this deadly plant was deliberately used for one of the most frivolous of purposes, cosmetics. Its most shocking, forgotten use is right in its name. Belladonna is Italian for beautiful lady. For centuries, particularly during the Italian Renaissance, which grew out of the late medieval period, women would carefully prepare an extract from the belladonna plant. They would then use an eyedropper to place a single tiny drop of this potent liquid into each of their eyes. The atropine in the extract would block the receptors in the muscles of the iris that cause the pupil to constrict. As a result, their pupils would become huge, dark, and mesmerizing. This wide-eyed, doe-like look was considered the height of beauty and allure. It was a signal of excitement and arousal, and these women were chemically inducing it. It was an incredibly dangerous practice. An overdose of even one drop could cause blurred vision, confusion, heart palpitations, and even death. They were literally risking their lives for a beauty trend. Like henbane, belladonna also had a place in the darker side of medicine and intrigue. Its pain-killing and sedative properties meant it was another component of surgical anesthetics and soporific sponges. But its potency as a poison made it a favorite tool for assassins. A few drops of belladonna extract in a glass of wine, or a few berries mixed with other food, could kill a political rival with symptoms that could be mistaken for a sudden, violent illness. The Roman Empress Livia was rumored to have used it to poison her husband, the Emperor Augustus. This reputation as a subtle, untraceable poison made it a plant of fear and suspicion. The use of belladonna as a cosmetic faded as beauty standards changed, and the dangers became more widely understood. Its use in medicine has been refined. Atropine, the chemical extracted from it, is still a vital drug used by ophthalmologists to dilate pupils for eye exams and in emergency medicine to treat certain types of slow heart rate and as an antidote to nerve agent poisoning. We have tamed the poison and put it in a sterile vial. We have forgotten the time when people willingly, even eagerly, dropped that same poison into their eyes in the name of beauty. How did women learn to prepare an extract that was just weak enough not to cause immediate blindness or death? What was the long-term effect on the eyesight of women who used this cosmetic regularly? And in our own modern pursuit of beauty, with chemical peels, injections, and cosmetic surgery, are we really so different from the beautiful ladies of the past, risking our health for an aesthetic ideal?